A flavor beyond time. The air was thick with the scent of rosemary, thyme, and a whisper of something more. The kitchen was a symphony of clattering pots, sizzling pans, and the soft hum of the oven's warmth as it embraced the dish of the day. But none of that could capture the chaotic energy that was about to unfold. Gavin Bennett, a young and ambitious chef, paced back and forth, his brow furrowed in frustration. He had been preparing for this night for weeks, an exclusive dinner for a group of influential food critics, the kind of night that could make or break a chef's career. The pressure had built up over months of planning, and now, as he stood in front of his stove, everything seemed to be crumbling. He had miscalculated the ingredients for his signature dish, a dish that had been heralded as the pinnacle of his culinary prowess. He could already hear the critics in his mind, tearing apart every aspect of the meal. The tomatoes were too sour, the sauce too thick, the flavors too muddled. The entire dish was ruined. But Gavin wasn't ready to give up. He wasn't going to let the night end in failure. Not when he had come so far. Instead of tossing the dish into the trash, he hesitated. Something in him wanted to see it through, to push past the boundaries of his perfectionism and embrace the possibility of something new. So, he carefully plated the flawed dish, adding a final touch of basil, a drizzle of olive oil, and a sprinkling of sea salt. Perhaps it wouldn't be perfect, but it was his creation.
And that was enough.
As the guests began to trickle into the dimly lit dining room, Gavin tried to steady his nerves. The critics, a mixture of stern faces and sharp tongues, sat at the long oak table, their eyes scanning the room with the subtle judgment of people who had tasted it all. The evening was only just beginning, but already the weight of their expectations bore down on him. When the first course arrived, a fresh salad with delicate goat cheese, a few raised eyebrows were all that Gavin could manage. But as the plates were cleared, he felt the familiar sting of disappointment. Then came the main course, the dish that was meant to define him. As the servers placed the plates in front of the guests, Gavin stood back, holding his breath, watching every movement, every flicker of emotion on their faces. He had made a mistake, an unforgivable mistake in the kitchen. But just as his heart began to sink, something unexpected happened. One of the critics, a woman with sharp black curls and a gaze that seemed to pierce right through him, took a bite. Her lips parted as she closed her eyes, savoring the taste. She paused for a moment, and then another bite, her expression shifting into something unexpected, something warm, inviting. "Gavin," she said, her voice rich and smooth, "this is extraordinary." The room seemed to hold its breath as the other critics took their first bites, their reactions a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Gavin stood frozen, unsure of how to react. The flavors were unlike anything he had ever made. The sweetness of the tomatoes mingled perfectly with the tang of the sauce, and the herbs added an unexpected depth. It was something new, something unexpected. He had not followed the recipe. He had not stuck to the rules. But in that moment, he realized that the mistake, the so-called failure, had led him to something that no one could have predicted. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The critics praised the dish with enthusiasm, throwing out words like innovative and bold, and Gavin's heart swelled with pride. But in the back of his mind, a question lingered. Was it really the dish that they loved, or was it the story behind it? Was it the fact that he had made a mistake, and instead of abandoning it, he had embraced it? Maybe it was a combination of both, but either way, Gavin knew that he had just stumbled upon something much bigger than he had anticipated. In the world of fine dining, where precision and perfection reigned supreme, he had learned a simple yet profound lesson. Mistakes could lead to greatness, to discoveries that no amount of planning could ever achieve. But that night wasn't over yet. The last guest had just left, and Gavin remained behind in the empty dining room, cleaning up the remains of the night's success. It was late, and he was exhausted, But there was something else tugging at him, an odd sensation that he couldn't quite place. As he wiped down the counters, he felt a presence, something that seemed to linger in the corners of the room. He looked up and froze. There, standing in the doorway, was a woman. She was dressed in a flowing white gown, her hair long and wild, as if it had been swept by a gust of wind. Her eyes glowed with an intensity that was both unsettling and captivating.
She didn't speak.
She didn't need to. Gavin's heart raced, and for a moment, he wondered if he was imagining her. But then she stepped forward, her feet silent against the polished wooden floor. "Who are you?" Gavin asked, his voice trembling slightly. The woman smiled softly, her expression distant, yet full of knowing. "I am the one who whispers to the mistakes," she said, her voice like a melody in the silence of the room. Gavin felt a chill run down his spine. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, stepping closer, "that the greatest discoveries are often born from the mistakes we make. You think it's the recipe, but it's not. It's the courage to try, to fail, and to find the beauty in what you didn't intend. It's in the unexpected, the unpredictable. That is where true greatness lies." Her words lingered in the air like an enchantment, and Gavin felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. He had always been obsessed with control, with perfecting his craft, with making sure everything was just right. But in that moment, he realized that the very thing he feared most, failure, was the key to unlocking a new world, a world of possibility and creativity. The woman reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Embrace the mistakes, Gavin. They will lead you to the extraordinary." And just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman vanished. Gavin blinked, his heart pounding, unsure if he had just experienced some sort of dream or if it had all been real. But as he stood there in the quiet kitchen, the lesson settled deep within him. Mistakes were not to be feared, they were to be celebrated. They were the moments when magic happened, when the boundaries of the known world were shattered and the impossible became possible. Gavin knew that his life would never be the same. The next day, he would rise to the challenges of his career with a new mindset, one that embraced the beauty of imperfection. And he would take that lesson with him, not just in the kitchen, but in every part of his life. The mistakes, the failures, the things that went wrong, these were the things that led to the most extraordinary moments. They were the moments that changed everything. Years passed, and Gavin's restaurant became one of the most sought-after dining experiences in the world. His creations were celebrated not just for their bold flavors, but for their willingness to break the rules, to experiment, to push the boundaries of what was possible. He had become a symbol of creativity and innovation, a reminder that the road to greatness was not always a straight path. And on the day of his greatest triumph, as he stood in front of a room full of people who had come to celebrate his success, Gavin took a deep breath and smiled. In that moment, he understood the profound truth that had guided him all these years. The greatest discoveries were not found in perfection, but in the mistakes that led to something greater. He raised his glass, and with a soft chuckle, he said, "To mistakes. May we continue to make them and find the beauty in them every time." The room erupted in applause, and Gavin knew that the journey had only just begun. And with that, the story came to a close, leaving behind a legacy that would be remembered not just for its triumphs, but for the courage to embrace the unexpected and find greatness in the most unlikely places. The lesson was clear. Mistakes were not failures. They were the gateway to something far more extraordinary, and that, Gavin knew, was a flavor that would linger in his soul forever.
whispering echoes